Hello and welcome to another educational video from Physio Fitness in Maidenhead. This video is on the hip joint. So if we look at the pelvis and hip region from the front, this is what we see. We can see the two pelvic bones here, and this is your lumbar spine coming down here with each of the discs in between. And if we look from the side, we can see the back here. This is the sacrum, this is your pelvis, and this is the outside of the hip bone. So if I turn that back round to the front, we can see here that this is your femur or thigh bone coming all the way down to the knee and all the way up to the hip. It's the largest bone in the body, longest bone, and this is the outside of that femur, which has a lot of muscle attachments. The gluteal muscle group, or the glutes or buttock muscle, come round the side here and insert onto the outside of this bone here. And from the front we have muscles that come from the spine. They come down into this pelvic region here and then through the front of the hip down into the front of the thigh bone here, or the femur. And when those muscles shorten or contract, they bend your hip joint up into this position, and then when they relax, the hip goes back down again. They're called the hip flexors, and they're at the front of the hip. So if we look at the actual hip joint, we can see here that it is a ball and socket joint. The big ball of the thigh bone or the femur is nice and big, nice and round, and it fits nicely into that socket or cup. This is called the acetabulum, this cup here, and it's nice and deep. So the hip is a very, very stable joint. The ball fits nicely in the socket and it allows a lot of mobility around that region, but also stability. Coming around the edge of this cup here, we have a piece of cartilage, which you can't see on this model, but that piece of cartilage is called the labrum, and that is a piece of cartilage that winds its way round that socket and creates extra stability for the hip joint when the hip is rotating like this and when it's bending backwards and forwards in a flexing and extending way. So this is flexion, this is extension, and then when we move the leg out to the side, you can see what happens here. This is abduction and adduction as we bring the leg back down again. Okay, so that's the hip from the front. If I turn it round and we look from the back now, we can see here that the sacrum is this region here, and this is the pelvis, as I said before. If we look just to the side, we can see there's a little groove in there, and that's the Sacroiliac Joint, or SIJ, which is a common cause of complaint for a lot of people. And that is a joint that is a fairly fixed and stable joint because of how the bones fix together, but also the ligaments that cross this region and the muscles that come down from the spine and the muscles that come across from the hip here. So all of these areas, the muscles that come across this region, add to the stability of this sacroiliac joint in that region there. These little yellow bits are the nerves from the sacrum, okay, and they come out and span round into this region here. And the nerves from the spine, as we've talked about in the lumbar spine video, form two main branches of the nerves that come down into the leg, the femoral nerve and the sciatic nerve. Okay, these two areas, this bone at the bottom of the hip here, this rounded structure, is where your hamstrings insert onto. Your hamstrings start at the bottom here and they work their way up the leg and they actually insert on this bone. So they attach to that bone there. And this is the bone that we sit on when we sit down. If we look into the middle, this is your coccyx or tailbone. And these red areas show where muscles attach onto. So there's a lot of areas of muscle attachments there around the hip and pelvic region. And then if we look to the femur, the blue areas are where the muscles attach onto the thigh bone there. And that is the hip joint. I hope you found that helpful.